Hi, I'm Robert Greaves, and this is The Point. This week we're talking with Doug Woodring, an environmental entrepreneur and the founder of the Ocean Recovery Alliance, about the ocean and the environment. Doug, I'm really happy to have you here with us today.
Robert, nice to see you.
Let's start off. How did you and why did you form the Ocean Recovery Alliance?
Actually, it was by accident.
Oh.
I had no plan to run an NGO, but at that point had lived in Asia for 15 years and grew up in California, and I do a lot of water sports, and whether diving, swimming, competing and paddling, I just see it a lot more on the plastic and the ocean side than a lot of normal people walking through the street. And I also felt that Asia wasn't doing very much at all on the topic. Way behind some countries in the West. It was evident to see air pollution was a lot worse here at that time. Water pollution was worse. And when I learned about the plastic in the ocean issue 10 years ago, that there was some big island, which we know is not an island, but it's a lot of material. We did a big expedition there, and it got a lot of press. Mm-hmm. We brought Scripps Oceanography with us on that trip, and it was the first real science that had been done in the middle of the ocean before, and that set a new stage for the discussion with industry and government.
So you're mentioning some big names like Scripps, so you had to be a little plugged in beforehand and know some people and have a network to get this thing started, right?
That's a great question, and that's, I guess, one of my assets is I'm connected a lot, but I didn't have them in that ocean space at the time.
So you really had
it
to
was
build
really
it
an
from scratch.
entrepreneurial idea, so I'm really an environmental entrepreneur is how some people, they always want to introduce me as an activist, and I said that's not the right word at all. Activist, in the connotation there is that you're stirring up a beehive and creating animosity and a lot of friction with the people that you're trying to help fix. I would call it actionism, and we're trying to motivate and create programs and plans and ideas that people take action on and can replicate and get bigger.
So what was the situation like in the ocean around Hong Kong when you started, and has it improved?
Very good question. I would say it's a little bit better. But pretty much the same, and much of that is because the region hasn't changed that much, and Hong Kong's material often comes from non-Hong Kong sources when it depends on the wind and the currents, and much of the world is only just waking up to this issue today, so now the world is much more aware of it, much more ready to take action, but hasn't necessarily taken the action, so the activities at the water and the bleeding are still there.
Well, you've gone all over the world advocating. I think you've been to Davos and other places. And so what you're saying is that just talking about it and raising awareness is not enough. So my question is, does Hong Kong need to legislate this? Do we need to have laws to help clean the ocean?
Yeah, so it's two different issues and a few things in that question. Talking about it is very important because now I can not waste my talking, and I can go into a company and get right to the action. How do you want to fix your packaging? What do you want to do? 8 years ago, it was talking to get them to understand why this is important for their brand and their consumers. Mm-hmm. And without that, so now we're at the level where there's enough press and public social awareness that we don't have to spend time trying to explain the rationale, but now we can say, what do you want to do? What is your commitment for 2025? How are you going to get there? What kind of materials are you going to use? So the question on legislation is a great one because Hong Kong prides itself on being free, laissez-faire. Pretty good example of how free market does not work for the environment because volunteerism is not always big enough to make real change. There's always cheaters and people around the sides who don't do as well as, so you do need to legislate in order to make some big changes. Styrofoam lunchboxes would be a great example of where legislation can and should happen immediately in Hong Kong. There's no reason to have that as a material anymore. There's plenty of There's plenty of substitutes, and as soon as someone argues about cost, well, you just remind them that you put the cost on the society by using that styrofoam, because we all have to deal with it as a trash product.
So if I'm walking along the beach in Lantau and I see a lot of plastic and a lot of stuff washed up on the beach, where does that come from? Does that come from passing ships? Does that come from people throwing it into the water from the shore? Where does it come from?
I would say, unfortunately, a lot of it still on the, if you look at the lunch boxes, you can tell roughly how long a fresh one's been in the water. Fresh meaning not so long. Sometimes that comes from fishing boats around here, because maybe they're not so educated, they don't have any place to put it, they don't want to keep it in their boat, and they are used to just throwing it overboard. And that's one part of the population that just grew up that way. A lot of the other stuff, when you see it, it's green, it's got algae on it, it's been in the water a long time. Most of that would come from China. We live on the edge of the Pearl River Delta, 80 million people. As soon as there's a big rain, bad waste management, it all just plastic is lightweight, it just comes right down the river. And 3 weeks after a big rain, we get it in Hong Kong, depending which way the winds blow. Ships dumping is not so popular anymore, not so common. But there is a good reason to try to equalize legislation globally on port facilities and recycling, because some ports still charge fees for waste collection at the port, and some of the cheap shipping companies who are not as good as the other more CSR related ones will dump their stuff at sea 12 to 15 miles and still in international waters before they come in, so they don't have to pay the waste fee.
I see.
And that is a bad incentive for for us who are trying to clean the problem.
Right. Let me ask you, it seems like there are now two parts to this problem. So I imagine you're going into corporations trying to get to see their management, their boards, and say, please take action on this. But then there are the plastic manufacturers as well. Are you going after them?
Yeah, so there's a few big stakeholders, and we talk about the ocean a lot, but in reality this has nothing to do with the ocean. There's no piece of the ocean that is a solution to this problem. It is 100% man on land. Businesses and the way we do stuff in communities. So it has to be on the land base, where how the government has waste management capacity, that's a government infrastructure issue. On the corporate side, it's the brands and the product and the packaging. The producers, who are the polymer makers, have a role to play. They can and should be using more recycled content into their materials that they give out as a product for the users. The user being the packagers, who would package a candy or a toy or make a car part or a computer. Those are the users. We need to get to kind of both of them and have them working together to increase recycled content numbers, or if you're a packager and a user, decrease the use of silly material packaging, which is things that are non-functional for the sale and use of that good. Sometimes they're packaged simply for the beauty and the look and the feel, to look better on the shelf to sell it. But that's not functional for the product and the product inside. So consumers are starting to see through this wasteful packaging, and that's something that is a low-hanging fruit that can be weeded away, hopefully.
So you said 9 years, not a lot has happened. Do people get advocacy fatigue over this issue? Do they think maybe it's intractable and it's never going to go away?
No, I mean, like I said, I think the tipping point has come about a year ago, and so the people are aware of it. It's now the next chapter is how they're starting to do things better. So if it's an entrepreneurial company, they immediately come out with better packaging that might be recycled cardboard with no plastic on it. Right. And that's starting to come into the market. The consumers are starting to say, I don't want those bananas wrapped in plastic anymore. Retailer, deal with it.
So let me ask you about your projects. What are you doing now? What have you been doing around the region?
So we started a great program about 2 years ago in Cambodia on the Tonle Sap Lake, and we have 2 festivals now every 6 months called the Water Falling Festival, the Water Rising Festival. They had never had any recycling, waste management, any care to this topic. They had never even thought about it before. And now in our last event we had 4,000 people in 4 villages. Wow. We have full government support, and the waters rise and fall there 6 meters a year, half a year, and there's no lake in the world like that. So it's kind of like it's tidal, but the tide is every 6 months instead of daily. And so when the water goes out, it brings all the plastic into the lake, and when it comes back in, it brings it into the village, and that's the premise of doing the cleanups at either side, and people really love it. So that's great. We have our plasticity event. It's our 13th conference in 8 years. It will be at the UN's headquarters in November on the 12th. They're doing a week-long event called Sea of Solutions, and this conference we've been running a few times a year. It's about the focus of plastic in its second life and how to reincarnate plastic, the garbage, so it doesn't become garbage.
So you reuse it, put it into other things.
Exactly. So if you're a piece of plastic, you want to be reincarnated. If your friend, who's the other piece of plastic, doesn't get reincarnated, he becomes garbage and he's a bad guy.
I see. Okay. I'll think about that. The kids, it always comes down to the young kids. Do you do anything to educate them? Are you involved in that at all?
We have been. We've done Kids Ocean Day here 4 or 5 years. We have a program now which the Jockey Club helped fund called Water Caretakers of Tomorrow, and it's for 6th to 8th graders. It's in English and Chinese now, and it's for water systems from the mountain to the ocean and all different levels of how water works around the different communities. So that's a great one, not specific just on plastic. We have a play and a puppet show that we wrote around plastic and recycling. It's in 7 languages already. It's been performed at the UN conference in Malaysia by a Cambodian theater group.
Wow.
So all of these are free to use assets that we want others to use and replicate if they have the right team or theater group or school education system. That's what we're trying to just spread the word on.
Great. I keep reading this phrase, zero waste life. What does that mean, and is it I'm assuming it's relevant in this case.
It's relevant, super hard to get to, especially in a city like Hong Kong where everything has a label and a package and a barcode. People worried about hygiene. Hygiene fears are one of the biggest challenges to plastic pollution reduction. Even straws are one of the reasons people argue they need a straw. 10 or 15 years ago, no one even thought about hygiene in a straw. Today they will tell you that they can't touch the edge of a cup to drink it without a straw because there might be hygiene issues. So that is a marketing and branding and social awareness challenge. But going zero waste means your food waste goes in the right place, gets composted, your rock, paper, glass, metal is pretty easy to recycle here now. Plastic is the real big challenge. And when you buy things, then you get plastic on them, which is hard to avoid. And it's hard to be that zero waste because the recycling at the end is not there to handle your material. So technically, if you did buy those things, but you know that there's very good recycling for each of them and you get it in the right channel, you could still claim your zero waste because you know it's getting actually recycled properly. But Hong Kong doesn't have that capacity yet.
Okay. So here we are, you started in 2010. It's now, we're going to be into 2020 before you know it. What do the next 10 years look like? What do you think, looking down the road, what's this situation going to be like in 10 years?
In Hong Kong or around the world?
Well, both.
So there's interesting things happen. I think we'll see improvement. So one of your questions was, I think, sort of, do you lose inspiration because there's such a big problem and it appears that there's not a lot of change? I never really think about that, actually. Because the issue is so big, there will always be things to do forever in my life. Right. So even if someone doesn't solve it here, I can do things in Cambodia or Kenya or another country, and was just in Ladakh speaking with the monks.
Wow.
To have an audience of these different community who really are interested and very eager, they can make a change in 5 minutes in a decision, and the community will follow. And when I see that happen, it just keeps me going. So I don't think too much about the daily detail. 10 years from now, I think there'll be a huge amount of business in the reverse supply chain and bring back programs. That's how you get the materials back from the consumers. No one is really addressing that now. Alibaba, Amazon, all of these guys who ship out, need to start thinking about shipping back in and recovering. That'll be a big business. The Basel Convention, I believe, will backfire. That was a big thing that all the environmental groups and groups were celebrating 8 months ago. It's meant to go into effect in 18 months. What that says is they put plastic on the hazardous material list. This was set up in 1989 so countries don't ship each other hazardous bad garbage. Of course you don't want to do that. But unfortunately right now the press is so strong that most governments say, oh, we can't be seen to be having any plastic in our society being imported, we're going to ban it, all of it. And what that does is it forces every single country to then create their own circular economy, which sounds nice, but in reality the chances of that happening are almost zero. The big countries can do it, the little ones cannot. They have nowhere to put it, they have no manufacturing to feed it into, and unless we have the ability to trade as a product and commodity like wood or copper or anything else we trade, plastic is one of those. We need to be able to move it to the countries that can have the capacity to handle it. And of course we don't want to send them dirty stuff, but if the borders shut down on this, I think the issue will get worse than better, because countries will burn it and throw it away because they won't have the ability to move it around.
Wow, okay. So this program is called The Point, and we like to sum up in these episodes. So I'm going to ask you, if there's one point you'd like to leave the viewers with concerning plastic, what would it be?
Avoid as much as you can that's not needed for your products and services and your packaging and things you're selling. Be proud, if you're a business, to get out there and tell the story that you've made some changes, even if it's not perfect. I think a lot of brands do not have a good marketing spin, and I'm not saying it should be false, but they don't even tell the stories when they have good ones. Mm-hmm. They don't tell it the right way, and therefore they don't get the engagements from the consumers, and then you don't get the replication of their peer groups who follow them. And so I would say be bold, be excited, get engaged, and just do something, because that will be the start of the trend to move the rest of your packaging or materials or recycled content into a much broader base of use.
Great. Thank you very much for being with us, Doug.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that's The Point for this week. Please follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and let's keep the dialogue going. Thank you.